So in this video, we're gonna talk about 5 reasons why I love no-code. And specifically, we're gonna discuss 5 things that are super easy to do with no-code, but are a pain to do with traditional programming. And after this video, you're gonna better understand why someone like me, who's an ex-software engineer, has been coding using traditional programming languages for many years, absolutely loves no-code, and believes that no-code is the future. Okay, so let's begin. So the first reason why I truly love no-code is because of something called CRUD. CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. And essentially, anytime you create an object, anytime you're dealing with some kind of data, one of the first things that you have to do is you have to create these operations that allow you to create this object, read the data in there, update this object with new information, or delete this object. Because regardless of what you're doing, maybe you're building a blog or an e-commerce site or a portal or a website, doesn't really matter what kind of app you're building, chances are at one point or another you will have to create a new object, read data in this object, update data, or delete this object altogether. And if you're doing no code, it's super easy because it's already built in. But if you're doing something with traditional programming, regardless of the language, regardless of the framework, you kind of have to worry about it. You kind of have to go out and implement it. Sure, frameworks do come into play and they make it easier, but still, it's not as easy as doing it with a no-code tool. Let me show you exactly what I mean. And so here I have a Bubble app, and this is one of the e-commerce sites that I built out and did a tutorial on one of the previous videos. So if we run this app, you're gonna see that this app is all about data. It's all about managing that data. That's what really apps are about. So here we have a bunch of widgets, we have a bunch of things, and so let's say I want to buy something, I can click on it and I can kind of learn more about it, all right? And so I can add it to cart, and then I can do a checkout. And now I am logged in, and this is a list of products that I have. And now if I want to delete it, that's a delete operation on a list that's connected to me, and that's really easy to do. I just click on this and it's gone. It doesn't show up, it's completely gone. Because if I go back to Bubble and I go into data thing here and I go into data types, right? And let's say I have a user here. This user has a list of products, which is essentially a shopping cart. And if I go into a workflow, right? So we have a workflow. Let me go back to the checkout page that I was just on. So here I am on the checkout page. And when I click on the X button, that essentially deletes this product from my shopping cart. What it does is it makes changes to the user. So as you can see, this cart remove, it removes a product that's listed from my own shopping cart. And this is built in. This is actually, if you're not doing no code, you actually have to go out and you actually have to code all this stuff. You have to make sure it's doing it correctly. But here it's super easy. I can pick cart, I can say remove, add, I can set list, I can add a new list, I can remove the entire list, I can clear the list. And so all of these operations are built into Bubble, and this allows me to create any kind of data that I want, maybe, categories, products, sellers. And anytime there's a business decision where I need to maybe update a category, delete a product, update a seller, delete a user, maybe the user is no longer paying a monthly fee, or the user decided to leave the platform, it's very easy to do so because that's a built-in part in the workflow. So all I have to do is go in here, I can go to data, I can create a new thing, I can make changes to a thing. So I can do make changes to a thing, I can say current sales product, current user, and then I can modify what I want. So I can say all fields, and I can change the card, first name. Let's say I only want to modify the first name, and I can change that specific field to exactly what I wanted to do. So if I'm developing an app, I will always be reading, creating, updating, or deleting data. That's just the fact of life. An app is essentially data plus logic. And tools like this make it super easy to do so. And same thing with something like an Appgyver. Here I have an Appgyver app. This essentially shows how many cases there are in a specific country. I can come in here and I can essentially add logic, right? I have this field here. I can simply add logic to it. I can say add logic. I can scroll down. I have data. I can update this record, so I can drag and drop it, I can connect it, you know, if there's a component, and I can easily update it. Here it is. The way it works in Appgyver is slightly different than the way it works in Bubble, but it doesn't really matter. What's important is that all of these operations are built in already, and this makes our lives as no-code developers a lot simpler. The second thing I want to cover is UI and UI variable binding. It's reactive. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are actually two things here that I'm listing as a single bullet point. The first thing is that we have a UI. It's very easy to design. All we have to do is drag and drop various elements, and then we have a UI. But it's a lot more than that. What makes it super powerful is that it's very easy to drag and drop a certain element and connect data to it, right? We have data in the backend, whether it's a locally stored database or we're getting it externally, but it's very easy to bind those UI elements on the screen to a data, whether, you know, it's a locally stored data or somewhere else. Super easy. And it's not only a one-way binding, it's not only read-only, it's very easy to overwrite that data, change that data, display that data. And when you're doing something with traditional programming, you kind of have to worry about it. And sure, there are tools that are constantly evolving. There are all kinds of frameworks. It is becoming easier to do that, but it's still not at the same level. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So here we are back at the Bubble app. This is essentially my e-commerce store, right? And I want to display a list of products that are for sale. It is an e-commerce store after all. And these products, where are these products? Well, all I have to do is drag a repeating group. And that repeating group, if I double click on it, I specify the type of content right away. I say, well, this is going to be a product. And I also specify a data source. And this is very powerful. Both of these things. Number one, by specifying the type of content, Bubble knows exactly what does the product have. So I say this is product. And I go back to data, and Bubble understands, okay, this is going to have these fields, and it lets me populate those fields right away. It lets me kind of work with that data. If I say this is a category, then it's going to know, okay, category has these fields. This is very powerful because you simply cannot do that as easily with traditional programming. With traditional programming, you have to always remember what kind of fields you're dealing with. You kind of have to always keep it in mind. So if I create a product somewhere in a table in a database and I'm using some framework, that framework needs to know what kind of data I'm dealing with. Otherwise, it's just going to be a mess. And so in this example, I specify product, and then as a data source, I say, well, go and search for products. I can click on that. I say product, get it from our local storage. If I don't want to do that, I can go in here and I can say something like this. I can go data source and I can say get data from an external API. Okay. If that data is stored somewhere else, maybe at another server, maybe I'm using a Rapid API to pull up, product data, it doesn't really matter. I can get it from an external API, and this is something we're going to cover in a bit. But nonetheless, this is fantastic because all I do is do search, I do product, I can add constraints, there's no constraints, and it pulls the products from local storage. Same thing with Appgyver. Now, Appgyver takes it a couple of levels above. It has a kind of a different data modeling thing. We just need to go into data here. And what you got to do is you need to create a data resource. That data resource is the core. This is kind of the root where you're getting all that data. Now, it also has a bunch of connectors. You have Google Firebase. You have file uploads, but here I'm using a data resource, and this data resource is actually, we have a base here because I'm getting this data from, it's a Rapid API endpoint, so I'm pulling this data from a third-party site. It's not stored locally, but as soon as I specify kind of the root collection, I can also specify these things, the CRUD that we just covered previously. We have the get collection, get record, create record, update record, delete record. This is kind of what CRUD is, right? And it knows the schema because when we initially query this data, we get the schema. So Appgyver understands, okay, so we need to get a collection. Or let's say we have a get record. It understands that get record has these fields. It has a quote, confirmed, country, critical. All of these fields are part of the get record. And as soon as it knows that, when I go back to the app, so if I go back to the app and I want to display it here, I go in here and I can specify. It's very easy. I bind it to the data, and it makes it super easy to pick the exact field that I want to specify. And honestly, this is one of my favorite features when it comes to no-code tools. And as soon as I discovered this some years ago, I said to myself, I am never going back to traditional programming because it's all done for me and I don't have to worry about that. And so all modern tools allow you to bind your UI to the underlying data one way or another. It's just each one of them has a certain way of doing it. The next thing I want to talk about is REST APIs, and this allows us to either connect to the app or have our app connected to something else. Typically, what I'm using it for, at least most of the time, is have my Bubble app pull data from somewhere else. So maybe I'm using a third-party API, maybe I'm using, maybe a sample API. Regardless what this API is, this allows me to treat this external data as internal data. That's what Bubble allows you to do. So let me show you exactly what I mean. So here I'm back in Bubble, and in order for me to query external data, all I need to do is go into plugins and make sure I have this API connector. It's just a plugin. You just press add plugins and we have an API connector. Once we do that, what you want to do is you want to expand your calls, right? So right now I have a new API. I don't have any calls for this API. What I want to do is I want to add another call, and I want to call it maybe API call 1. And now I just need to specify the source, the host name, the resource, where I'm going to be connecting to and getting all this data. And thankfully, I have a sample JSON API, so I can just copy it. You can just Google for it. You can just Google for sample JSON API. So I can just copy this endpoint, go back to Bubble, copy it here, and all I need to do is initialize call. Once I do that, I get an API. Now, what does this API look like? So if I go to this tool here, and I enter this call here and I query it, this is what the API call looks like. Essentially, I'm getting back a JSON object. It's one object with these fields. I have first name, last name, gender, age. I have an address, which is another object. And I have phone numbers, which is an array of objects. Okay, it's an array of one object. Address is one object. And then we have these simple fields here. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to query sample data from another source and kind of work with it. So what makes this so powerful when it comes to no-code tools is that Bubble gets this data and it defines this data. It makes it type data. This is very important. So for instance, it guesses that first name is text, last name is text, gender is text, age is a number. And this is very powerful because once Bubble knows not only what are the fields in that API, but also the type of fields, it can become more effective and efficient because now it knows this is a number. Okay, we can validate that number. We can say, okay, what is the age? We can do some mathematical operations in it. This is very powerful. So all I have to do is hit save, and then I can go back to my app. I have this repeating group. I can double click on it. And now this is products. And I can say, well, I don't want products anymore. I want a API call. Okay, and now I'm going to be getting data from an API call. I can say get data from an external API provider is this new API call. And now I can say instead of products, which is stored locally, I want my data to come from an external source. And Bubble understands it. Look at that. It tells me, okay, this specific call is going to have a first name, last name, gender. It understands the data I'm dealing with. And this is very, very powerful. It's the same thing when it comes to Appgyver. It does it very, very similarly. It's slightly different, but it's also very similarly. If I go into data and I go into base, here is where I specify my root URL. This is the main URL that is gonna host kind of the data that I'm dealing with. But that's not all. I still have to specify the methods. So I need to specify the get method, the get collection method, the get record method, update, create, delete, etc., etc. But now, when I do that and I make that initial request, it will tell me all the fields, and it will also tell me what type of field it is. Because later on, I can go to my data and I can specify those fields. So this is very, very powerful. Now, Bubble has a couple of other things that you can do with it. You can go into settings, it has something called an API, so I can actually connect to it. Instead of this app connecting out, I can connect to the app and get my data. I can enable this data API here that I have, and I can say, okay, I want to enable category, I want to enable product, seller, user, and that way I can make requests into my app instead of making requests from my app, and I can get the data that I want. And this makes it awesome for connecting with other apps. I can use something called a headless environment. There's so many cool things that I can do. That's a really big pain when it comes to traditional programming, because I need to go out, find a plugin, I need to make sure it works, I need to update the version, I need to make sure that it understands the data and all this stuff. It's a headache, trust me. But here it's all built in, and you don't have to think about it, you don't have to worry about it. The next thing I want to talk about is something that we truly take for granted if you're doing no-code programming. And really, what no-code programming tool does not come with a database? So this is Builtin Database. And if we go back to my Bubble app here, you just simply need to go to the Data tab here, and you have your data types. Not only do you have your data types, you also have privacy. I can define a new rule for a specific data type. We also have our app data, so I can go into all products, and I have my products here, right? I can, create a new product. I can do all this. Typically, this is separate from the app, because the app is going to exist as code, and then you're going to have, another database. It could be a MySQL, it could be Postgres, it could be NoSQL, it could be some cloud database, it could be Firebase, it could be anything. And you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, what kind of database do I want to use? Is it going to be a SQL database? Is it going to be relational database? Is it going to be non-relational database? And honestly, when I'm building an app, I don't want to think about the performance implications of picking a SQL database, NoSQL database, graph database, a relational database, non-relational database, cloud, local, etc., etc. I just want a database that I can start building right now. And that's kind of what I like about tools such as Bubble and other tools, is that here it is, it's available. We have categories, I can just hit refresh data, it's here, I can modify, I can really hit the ground running very, very quickly. And that is something we do take for granted when we are doing no-code development, and I'm so glad it exists. Last but not least, I want to talk about another point that we take for granted as no-code developers, and this is automatic server scaling. So typically, if you're building an app the traditional way, you're gonna go to a place like DigitalOcean or another service, and this service allows you to get something called a virtual host. And here's mine. I'm using DigitalOcean. I have a bunch of sites, I have a bunch of apps here, but the problem is, if one of my apps or one of my sites suddenly gets a spike of traffic, gets a lot of traffic, maybe it gets on the first place of Hacker News or Reddit or Slashdot, or some kind of a newspaper picks it up, I need to worry about scaling. I need to maybe add some memory or add some CPU or create another virtual host and load balance. There's all kinds of things that I need to constantly think about, because the way that I control my virtual host right now is through a shell. So this thing allows me to look at how much space I have left, what kind of processes are running. And so not only do I need to learn software, I need to learn how to code and how to code correctly and how to code effectively. I also need to understand how a host works and how to scale stuff. I also need to become a Unix administrator, an IT administrator. And that takes time away from coding. It takes time away from solving my problem, solving my customer's problem. But unfortunately, this is something I have to deal with because the tools that I'm using, they do not cover scaling and doing all this stuff. Sure, there are tools available that allow you to do it, but it's not automatic. It's definitely not automatic. But when you're using something like Bubble or Appgyver or any of these other tools, they take care of it for you. This is kind of one of the big advantages of doing no code, is that you don't really have to worry about scaling. You don't have to worry about your server failing because there's not enough memory. Run out of hard disk space. And trust me, I have had that happen to me before. It does happen. So that's another kind of boon with no code stuff, is that you're abstracted away from all the stuff. You never have to worry about it. And for me, that's a huge thing, because when you take all of this together, what is the biggest benefit? Well, the biggest benefit is that you can focus on business logic, meaning what does the software do? What is the purpose of the software? Is it, generating invoices? Is it time tracking? Is it, connecting buyers and sellers? Is it a marketplace? What is the business logic? Why are we building it? Why are people gonna pay us money? Next, customer problems. What problems are customers having? What's the issue? What is it that they're struggling with? We can solve that with software without worrying all the minute detail stuff. And last but not least, it allows you to make your software as useful as it can possibly be. And I cannot tell you how many times when I was building software, I had to worry about bugs, I had to worry about scaling, I had to create crud, I had to create my UI binding to data, I had to do all this stuff. And that was even before I started to think about why am I writing this in the first place. So definitely, as someone like me who has spent years and years working for some of the biggest companies out there, going to Nocode is amazing. It's a breath of fresh air. And so if you're still wondering whether Nocode is a hype, it's a fad, or is it super useful, or is it gonna stick around with us for a while, I can tell you that definitely it's here to stay. It solves a lot of problems, and furthermore, it abstracts you from dealing with the stuff that are not gonna make you any more money and not gonna allow you to solve any more of your customers' problems. And so that is all I wanted to cover. Those are the 5 main points that are super easy to do with Nocode, but a complete pain with traditional programming. I really hope I convince you to some extent if you're on the fence. On the other hand, if you're super passionate about Nocode, do me a favor and leave a comment below with no code in it somewhere, and that way I will know that not only are you super passionate about no code, but you also finished watching the video, and I will give you a big like. Now, if you enjoyed this video, definitely give this video a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and definitely do not forget to subscribe to this channel, because on this channel we only talk about different tips, tricks, tutorials having to do with no code. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you real soon.